I bartend at this craft cocktail bar in my town, quite a nice place. It was just prior to this past Christmas. My female friend was there visiting, and this one girl came in alone, and we really hit it off instantly. Vibe was great. I let her and my friend chat a while. We had talked about getting her to join us for yoga. I gave her my number and she left. Didn't hear from her for a while, but eventually I got a text. Hey, I just put on this little black dress to come visit you and the place is closed. So we started chatting a bit. Conversation was fantastic. Planned a date for that Thursday. Met and again. Instantly the vibe was immaculate. We had to make it brief, 45 minutes only, but it went so well that we were literally making out in the parking lot before we split ways. Kept talking again for another week until our second date, and we both made it very clear that we were very much into each other. She even showed me a conversation she had with her sister about how shocked her sister was she was letting a man pursue her, because it had been 2 years since she had allowed that. Second date arrives, we meet, are holding hands across the table, starting lovingly into each other's eyes. I was like, wow, is this what it's like to fall in love? She gets a phone call and starts holding back tears. She's got to go to the hospital. Her mom has been in poor health for about 4 years, she said. And it's this again. She was profusely sorry and made sure to say that she wanted to see me again as soon as possible. Gave me a kiss and left. Worried sick about her, I text her the next day, message only registered as sent, not delivered or read. So curious, I pick up the phone and call, and that's when I figured out my number got blocked, lol. Several months later, still no word or sight of her. What's crazy is I actually had to go through a short 3-day grieving period, even though it was literally a 1-week thing start to finish, lol. I've been ghosted before, but never anything like that, especially after having felt such a connection that she has confirmed to me was mutual. Looking back, she mentioned she had to set an alarm on her phone to take her meds every day, but I can't really confirm much from that about her mental state. But either way, that shit sucked. Didn't want to go on a date for a few weeks after that. Guy I met on Hinge were talking for a bit, and he invited me on a date to the zoo. I love animals, and it was the start of summer, and incredibly hot out, so I figured it'd be great to get my steps in and look at critters. I show up, he's wearing a clown sweater, long jeans, and boots. Meanwhile, I'm in jean shorts and a tank top with a water bottle. I was confused on why he was dressed so warmly as it was 90 degrees and humid, but I ignored it. We walked and then took the subway, and he knew the city better than I did. Tried making conversation, and he was virtually silent the whole ride. I made comments about how excited I was to go to the zoo, as I hadn't been to one in a while. He doesn't respond to this, weird, but I assumed he might be nervous and let it go. We get off our stop and he goes, "We're here." I look up confused. We aren't at the zoo. He took me to the Death Museum, as in a museum with real corpses and organs and the macabre. And listen, I would have been into it if I knew that's where we were going, but he asked me to go to the zoo. Spent the whole date awkwardly looking at colons and skulls and bog bodies. Kept trying to make conversation, but quickly realized he was just not a talking person IRL. Complete 180 from how he was over text, but I found him attractive, so I kept trying. It came time to leave and grab food, and people were out walking their dogs. It was a wonderful day, and being inside a dark, freezing building. Had to be cold to preserve the bodies and such. Being outside again was so nice. We had food from a truck. A lady walked by with a gorgeous giant dog, and I said, "Ah, so cute," and complimented her dog. After she left, my date said he couldn't stand dogs with an annoyed face, and at that point things felt so awkward. We finished eating, and were heading back to the subway so I could get to my car and leave. I kid you not, when we got off the subway, a man on the platform stabbed 2 people in front of us, and apparently had done this at a previous stop, and police were waiting to catch him at the top of the stairs. Me and my date had to walk through literal blood splatter and past paramedics to get back to the surface. I was officially bewildered, and he laughed about it, and he gave me an awkward fist bump and went back to his dorm. I took it all as a sign to stop seeing him and ghosted. This was all in Philadelphia, if you are curious. Clown sweater guy, I hope you find someone for you, weirdo. When I came across his profile, I wasn't immediately sold, but there was something about his messages, charming, self-deprecating humor, quick replies, that piqued my curiosity. He suggested we meet, and before I could talk myself out of it, I agreed. He wanted to see my favorite hiking trail. It seemed harmless enough. A busy trail, popular even in the rain, more of a scenic walking path than a trek into the wilderness. Looking back, I should have known better. The day of the date, A light rain had started to fall, leaving the air sticky and thick. I pulled into the trailhead parking lot and spotted his car. He was waiting inside, and I joined him to wait out the drizzle. It felt awkward immediately. There's something about sitting in a car with a stranger that makes the silence heavier, the small talk sharper-edged. He seemed normal enough at first, fiddling with his keys and talking about the weather. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled a pill bottle from his pocket, popped it open, and casually took something. "Klonopin," he said. "No big deal. People take medication all the time." But then he turned to me and said, "Want one?" I laughed nervously. "No, I'm good." He asked again a few minutes later, his tone playful but insistent. "Are you sure? Just one. It'll chill you out." I said no, I replied firmly. A faint alarm bell rang in my head. Offering once was weird, but 3 times? That was something else. I brushed it off, though. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe I was overreacting. When the rain lightened, we started the hike. The forest smelled damp and earthy, the trail lined with towering trees whose leaves dripped from the earlier rain. We walked side by side, talking, or rather, he talked, and I listened. He told me about his life, about his wealthy parents who owned a second home in my town. They let him live there rent-free, and recently, he'd turned it into what he called an artist collective. "We're just a bunch of creatives living together," he explained, grinning. "Sharing ideas, making art." When I asked what kind of art they made, his grin faltered. "Oh, he said vaguely. "We're still figuring it out. Mostly we just hang out, drink, and smoke. Build the vibe." I didn't have the heart to point out that didn't sound much like an artist collective. Instead, I told him about nursing school, about how hard I'd worked to get in, and how much I wanted to make a difference. His response caught me off guard. "That sounds like it'd be really hard on me if we were together," he said, his tone almost accusing. "I need someone who can be fully present, My stomach sank. Clingy wasn't even the word for it. Possessive? Controlling? I wasn't sure, but whatever it was, it sent a shiver up my spine. By the time the hike was over, I was already counting down the minutes until the date would end. But it wasn't over yet. He wanted to stop by Target, and I felt too awkward to say no. Inside the store, he wandered the aisles aimlessly, picking up a laundry basket and several kinds of socks. More socks than any one person could reasonably need. His sense of humor, which had seemed endearing in text, took on a strange, almost childish edge. He made bizarre noises at other shoppers, drawing confused glances and making me cringe, so hard I wanted to disappear into the floor. When it was finally time to leave, I drove him back to his car at the trailhead. Relief washed over me as I said goodbye, but it was short-lived. When I got home, I realized he'd left his socks in my back seat. Great. Now I had to see him again to give them back. That's when I noticed my phone had died. Plugging it in, I was greeted by a flood of missed calls and texts. 15 missed calls. Dozens of messages. My heart sank as I scrolled through them, all variations of "Are you okay?" and "Please respond." It had only been an hour since we'd parted ways. 1 hour. I felt the creepiness crawl over me like a second skin. This wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. I texted him back to let him know I was fine, but made it clear that I didn't feel a connection and didn't want to take things further. His response was intense. The calls and texts didn't stop. By the next day, he'd sent more messages, still asking if I was okay. "I had a dream you died," one of them said. It felt so real. I even searched for your name in the news to make sure it didn't happen. I didn't reply. What could I even say to that? I started ignoring the messages, hoping he'd get the hint. But then, a text came that sent a chill down my spine. Fine. This is how supervillains are born. Supervillains? Was that supposed to be a joke? A threat? I didn't wait to find out. I blocked his number and deleted his messages. For days afterward, I felt a lingering unease, like his presence was still hovering over me. I replayed the date in my mind, trying to figure out where it had gone so wrong, why I hadn't seen the red flags earlier. The Klonopin, the artist collective, the possessive comment about nursing school, it all seemed so obvious in hindsight. But at the time, I'd chalked it up to nerves, to quirks, to anything other than what it truly was, a disaster waiting to unfold. Posted this one before, but here you go again. It was grade 11, and I had just moved to a new town. I quickly became attracted to this one girl, and would have given my left nut for a date. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class, and I totally pulled out all the stops. I was doing whatever it took to get a date with this girl. In the class, there were a couple projects where you would have to sew a pillowcase, or a pair of pajamas, etc. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the projects at her house. Upon these visits, I began to question how badly I wanted this girl. She lived in what appeared to be a wood cabin, and her father seemed legitimately insane. The walls were lined with animal skulls. The guy was a hardcore hunter. He had bearskin rugs and antlers all over the place. He would always walk around with his shirt off, drinking a Budweiser, chewing tobacco, carrying a shotgun. He never spoke a word to me. By this time I was starting to gain some friendships in the school, and one of the guys I met, Neil, noticed that I'd taken a liking to her. He then asked me if I'd heard about her parents. He then proceeded to tell me that her dad killed her mom and got away with it. Her body was found in the middle of town, pumped by a couple of rounds from a shotgun. He got off on the charges from lack of proof, and she had to live with him because he was her last living relative. At this point, I was like, WTF? The story made no sense, and I wasn't about to believe it, but it definitely kinda rattled me. But there was no way that I was going to bring it up to her. Anyways, a little time passes, and I ask her out. I go to her place to grab her, and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, you know what'll happen to you if you touch her, and suddenly the story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, but I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that her dad was going to kill me when we got back to her place. So after a subpar date, I start the long drive back to her place. We get to the end of her driveway, long driveway, she had an acreage, and she gets me to park and turn off the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, forget her dad. I lean over and put some moves on. We stop, and I turn the lights back on. There's blood in the snow at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but didn't want to sound like a pussy. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I put the car in drive and start the winding drive down her driveway. The trail of blood seems to be getting thicker, and I'm getting more freaked out. She still says nothing as she's fixing her hair in her mirror. I keep driving. More blood. I turn the last corner of her driveway and see my headlights shift from the trees to her father, standing in the middle of the driveway, covered in blood. Blood all around him. Huge fucking knife in hand. And what appeared to be a naked human body lying at his feet. I start hyperventilating. Suddenly I'm crying and don't know why. I piss my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out I have had mild asthma for my entire life and had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway, shot it, drug it down the driveway and skinned it, or at least the part one saw, before we got back. Anyways, that was a little over 3 years ago, and I'm still with the girl. Her dad calls me a pussy all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex, her parents split up, her mom's actually pretty awesome too. So, that was my worst date ever. The night began like so many others in my college life, late, lazy, and entirely unremarkable. I was scrolling through my OkCupid messages when a new one popped up, the notification breaking the monotony of my evening. It was her. Her profile had been average, not someone I'd swipe on instinctively, but her messages were engaging enough to pique my interest. She was quick with her words, seemed eager to meet, and when she suggested grabbing food, I figured why not. It was already 9 p.m., I hadn't eaten yet, and a diner meetup sounded harmless enough. I told myself it wouldn't be life-changing, just a casual dinner, a chance to connect. But what unfolded that night was something I could never have anticipated, something so bizarre and nightmarish it would live rent-free in my head for years. When I pulled up to the local diner, I was still trying to temper my expectations. Her profile picture, though not exactly my type, had been perfectly reasonable. But as soon as she walked through the door, I felt my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. She wasn't what I'd expected, at all. Standing before me was a woman about 5 feet 2 inches, and somewhere in the range of 190 to 210 pounds. That in itself wasn't an issue. People looked different in real life, and I was prepared to roll with it. But there was something about her demeanor, her presence, that was toadish. Her movements were awkward, her smile forced, her energy heavy in a way that sucked the air out of the room. I tried to shrug it off. Looks weren't everything, and first impressions could be deceiving. Then I noticed she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her was a friend. And not just any friend, a 16-year-old girl. My date, by the way, was 20. I was 22. I froze for a moment, confused, as my mind tried to connect the dots. What was a 16-year-old doing here? Before I could even ask, another person walked in. A second friend, older, carrying a squirming toddler in her arms. I blinked. Was this real life? The whole group shuffled toward me, laughing loudly and cracking open cans of Monster Energy drinks as they plopped down at the booth. Yes, they had brought their own drinks into the diner. The server gave us a pointed look but said nothing, and I knew from that moment that the night was spiraling into something far beyond my control. I sat there, dumbfounded, as chaos unfolded around me. The toddler's mom, one of the two random tagalongs, quickly ran out of juice for the kid's sippy cup. Without missing a beat, she poured her Monster Energy drink into it and handed it back. The toddler took a few eager gulps before tossing the cup aside and grabbing the sugar shaker from the table. You know the kind, the metal cylinder with the little flap on top. The kid managed to dump sugar all over the table before shoving fistfuls of it into her mouth. The mom, she laughed. The friends, they laughed harder. And my date, she didn't even glance in my direction. I should have left then and there, but a part of me was too stunned to move. I kept thinking, this can't get worse. It always does. The three of them ignored me entirely, chatting amongst themselves like they were in their own private bubble. They reminisced about high school, gushing over which boys they'd had crushes on and who'd gotten fat after graduation. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. I might as well have been invisible. The server brought out my chicken sandwich, a lone island of normalcy in the chaos. I picked at it half-heartedly, tuning in and out of their conversation. I didn't even know how to interject, and at this point, I wasn't sure I wanted to. They were loud, oblivious, and obliviously loud. The toddler had graduated from eating sugar off the table to smearing it across her face, and nobody seemed to care. By the 5-minute mark, I'd given up on salvaging any sense of dignity. I focused on eating half of my sandwich, resigned to the fact that this was the worst date of my life. I didn't even know what the hell was happening anymore. Who brings a friend? Or two? And a toddler? To a date? When I finally decided I couldn't take another second of this madness, I excused myself. Nobody noticed. Not my date, not her friends, not even the toddler, who was now licking sugar directly off the table like a deranged cat. I walked up to the counter, caught the server's eye, and apologized profusely for the disaster at the table. I slipped her $50, way more than the meal cost, but I couldn't leave knowing she'd have to clean up that mess without something to soften the blow. Then I got the hell out. As I walked to my car, the cool night air hit me, and I felt like I'd escaped a war zone. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel and drove home. I didn't even bother checking my phone when I got back. My roommates were waiting, eager for the post-date debrief. "How'd it go?" one of them asked, grinning. I flopped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. "Let me tell you about the worst night of my life." And so, I recounted the chaos, the monster-drinking toddler, the sugar-covered table, the bizarre absence of any acknowledgement that I was even there. By the end, my roommates were howling with laughter. "It sounds like a fever dream," one of them said. "You're making this up." "I wish I was," I muttered. That night, I swore off OkCupid for good. I don't know what happened to my date or her entourage, and I don't care. But one thing's for sure, no amount of late-night hunger is worth what I went through. About a year ago, I went on a date with this guy who I had a few classes with. Let's call him Dice Guy. I lost touch with Dice Guy after the classes were over, and a few months later, he adds me on Facebook during the second semester of my freshman year. We exchange some messages, and he begins to explain that he has dropped out of university due to personal reasons. To be honest, I really didn't know much about him other than the insightful comments he made during class discussions. One day I was bored, and he suggests that we go out on a date. What was about to come was worst date ever. Because he dropped out of the university, he lives at home. He has a license to drive as well as some cars. I lived about 30 minutes away, and he asks me to drive. I thought, okay, might as well, because we were headed for a zoo about 20 more minutes away. He lived closer to it. I pick him up, he loads my car with his camera gear, a backpack, a heavy-ass tripod, and some random equipment. We're just going to the goddamn zoo, not a National Geographic photo shoot in the Costa Rican rainforests. I ended up wasting half a tank of gas, $30, just to pick him up and go to the zoo. I had also paid $5 for parking. Admission was cheap, about $7 for students, and because he still had his student ID, he got in for that price. Usually guys would offer to pay for movie tickets or dinners and whatnot, but Dice Guy thought I didn't deserve this. I paid for gas money and parking, and soon I will find I will pay for a lot of things. And the Chia Pass wouldn't fork over $7. So I ended up paying for it. The zoo had some pretty miserable looking animals, and Dice Guy went on and on about his photographic repertoire. He then started talking about how he likes watching animals being eaten by other animals, and how attractive Virginia Woolf was. When I spoke, he would immediately interrupt with his own stories, or ask me why my stories were worth talking about. We later went out to eat, and when the check arrived, he looked at me expectantly. The meal was only about $20 for both of us. He still didn't offer to pay, but would begrudgingly pay for his own. I had to take the check to the waitress to split it, and we ended up paying separately. When I thought the date was over, he suggests that we should drive an hour towards our university. It was still early in the day, and I told him I was almost out of gas. He says, "Well, go get some." I was stupid enough to do this, thinking he would pay, but nope. Instead, after I got back into the car and on the interstate, he whips out this big plastic canister containing a bunch of rocks. However, these rocks were colorful, geometric, and had numbers on them. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm just looking at them. These are my dice for Dungeons and Dragons. I always keep them in my pocket, because I never want to lose them." I laughed nervously and thought I would let this slide. After all, most people have their own hobbies and interests that they're passionate about. While driving, he started to rant about his ex-girlfriend. I had a few classes with her, and she was a very sweet girl. Dice Guy disagrees, and was apparently still bitter about their breakup. He said, "Yeah, I still stalk her on Facebook. She has a boyfriend. I sent her emails telling her she made love like a statue and what a sadistic bitch she was. I just nodded and kept driving." He continues, "When she didn't reply to those emails, I started emailing all her other email accounts she had in junior high and tried getting passwords to them. I asked, 'Why did you do that, Dice Guy?' I don't know, but she deleted those email accounts. I tried getting a hold of her new ones. I also emailed her new boyfriend and chewed him out. You should see it. I did such a good job." At this point I was already scared of him, but then he begins to elaborate on dropping out of university. Turns out that he was actually suspended for some reason. He will not tell me exactly why, which made his roommate freak out. His roommate had reported him to the university police, and Dice Guy was instructed to pack up his things and leave, never to return. I asked him if it was okay to go visit the university, and he said no, because there is a detective guy working there, and he caught me on campus before. It's okay though, I doubt he'll see me. I wasn't aware of what was going on, but apparently Dice Guy probably did something really bad that the university needs a detective to be on the lookout for him. I had my iPod plugged into the car and music was playing, and Dice Guy disconnects the AUX cord and plugs in his voice recorder. "WTF, Dice Guy? I want you to listen to my voice in the very last lecture I attended. It's a recording he made of himself talking to his instructor in a class, and how he felt about being suspended from school. I forget most of what the recording was about, but the bulk of it began with, 'Hello, can I go off topic and tell everyone what's been bothering me?' Dice Guy went on a tirade about not trusting anyone anymore, especially his roommate. You can hear the snickers from other students in the background and how flustered the instructor was. It was extremely painful to listen to. We walked around campus, and he started pulling out some papers. It was graded by a professor, and Dice Guy started beaming. This was the best paper I've ever written. I keep it around with me all the time. I asked him why he carried it around with him, but instead he pulled out more stuff. There was some hideous drawing with a snake eating its own tail and ugly writing all around it. This is a piece of artwork I made. I'm going to have it as a medallion one day. It was starting to get late, and there would be a long drive home, so we headed back. On the way, there is a toll booth, $5. Of course, I end up paying while Dice Guy replays his fucking recording again over my car stereo. I was already extremely infuriated and sped him back to his house another hour. We said goodbyes, and he immediately texts me later asking to hang out again, but I didn't reply. The following day, he texts me again. "Hey, I left my camera equipment in your car." Great. A friend told me that he would purposely leave his shit, in my case, camera equipment, in cars just to revisit you again in case you break off contact. Dice Guy finds out where I work. I had the opening shift, and goes to take his equipment. My workplace hasn't opened yet, but the pet store next door was, and he drags me inside to look at snakes. I would love a snake and watch it feed on mice. I love watching animals kill things too. Isn't it so epic? I had cut off contact with him and ignored his texts after that day. He would sometimes go into my workplace and try to talk to me, but I would immediately try to speak to another customer and look busy. Some of my coworkers even warned me if he was in the store, in which case I would hide. I ended up quitting my job in order to focus on school, and he messaged me almost a few days after I quit asking what I was up to, and if I still worked at the same place, and if I wanted to go out on a date again. After I blocked him, he made another FB account asking why I blocked him. Honestly, I was fucking scared of this guy. I was 15, young, naive, and hopelessly boy crazy. Every fleeting glance or half-hearted compliment from a guy had me spinning fantasies of epic romance. I wasn't picky. If you told me I was pretty, chances were I'd develop a crush on you. But then came Jesse. Jesse wasn't just another guy. Jesse was something else entirely. We met through a mutual friend. He wasn't exactly my type, but when he called me pretty, I felt a flutter of possibility. At 15, that's all it took. A simple compliment could crack open the door to daydreams of holding hands, whispered secrets, and, if things went well, one of those sweet teenage love stories you see in movies. I decided to give him a chance. A couple of weeks later, Jesse and I planned our first official date at the mall. I was a bundle of nerves, spending way too long picking out an outfit and convincing myself that this could be the start of something magical. When I finally saw him waiting for me, his smile stretched wide as he waved. My stomach did a little flip. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something. The first half of the date was straight out of a rom-com. We walked through the mall hand in hand, laughing and joking, and I remember thinking, this isn't so bad. Maybe he's actually a catch. We grabbed sodas from the food court, played around in a cheesy photo booth, and wandered aimlessly through stores we couldn't afford. Everything was light, sweet, and entirely typical. Then things took a turn. We found a bench tucked away in a quieter section of the mall, and Jesse suggested we sit for a while. I shrugged and sat down, still smiling, still lost in the glow of newness. He turned to me, his expression suddenly serious, and looked deep into my eyes. And I mean deep. "Wow," he said, his voice soft but intense. "When I look at you, when I look into your eyes, I feel like I'm looking into your soul." I froze. My brain scrambled to process the words. Was this a compliment? A confession? Or something else entirely? I was 15, remember. Romantic, yes. Prepared for this? Absolutely not. I smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. But he wasn't done. "DF awesome," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I know this seems soon, but I think you might be my soulmate." Soulmate. On a first date. At the mall. I stared at him, my smile slipping just a fraction as he kept going. "I can't wait until the day we can get married," he said, his eyes still locked on mine. "Have babies together. Build a life. It's going to be amazing, don't you think?" Don't you think? What the hell was I supposed to think? 1 minute we were sipping sodas and goofing off, and now this guy was essentially proposing to me on a bench outside of Claire's. My mind reeled as the weight of his words sank in. I'm 15. I'm on a first date, and this guy is talking about marriage and babies. For a moment, I just sat there stunned. Part of me wanted to laugh, but another part of me was scared. The intensity in his eyes wasn't playful or teasing. It was serious. Dead serious. And I realized with a cold jolt that Jesse genuinely believed everything he was saying. This wasn't just a line. He actually thought I was his soulmate, and he was laying out our future like it was the most natural thing in the world. I knew I had to get out of there. "Oh," I said, standing up quickly and forcing a nervous laugh. Wow. That's a lot. I need to use the bathroom." He looked confused, maybe even a little hurt, but I didn't stick around to explain. I turned and walked away as fast as I could without breaking into a full-on sprint. My heart was pounding, my face burning with a mix of embarrassment and panic. I ducked into the nearest store, pretending to browse while I tried to figure out my next move. After a few minutes, I peeked out from behind a rack of clothes, half expecting Jesse to be standing there, waiting for me. Thankfully, he wasn't. I bolted for the exit, pulling out my phone to text a friend for a ride. There was no way I was going back to that bench, or to Jesse. I ghosted him after that, deleted his number, ignored his texts, and avoided the mutual friend who had introduced us. For weeks, I lived in fear that I'd run into him at the mall or somewhere else, but thankfully, our paths never crossed again. Looking back, it's almost funny how quickly things went from sweet and innocent to full-blown run for your life. Almost. At the time, though, it was one of the most bizarre and uncomfortable experiences of my teenage years. I mean, who talks about marriage and babies on a first date? At the mall? One time I was talking to this girl via MySpace that randomly friended me. I was 17 at the time, very dumb of me. And she happened to live around 15 minutes from me. She told me that her and her cousin were throwing a party at their place later, and that I should come. I was bored and recently got out of a relationship, so I thought even though I had never met this chick, it'd be a good idea to go over and try to meet some new girls. I look up the directions to her place, and I can tell it's in a backwoods area. I live in Louisiana, so I was already thinking it was sketchy, but I went with it. I find the place, and it turns out to be this really shitty-looking trailer park like some place you would definitely find a few small meth labs. I walk up, and the girl lets me in, and it's got this extremely weird feeling in the air. I sit down and start talking to the girl. She's the only one there at this point. And she was just talking about music and whatnot, and then was saying her cousin saw me on MySpace and was looking to hook up with somebody, so I could easily get lucky tonight. I was thinking that'd be awesome if the girl was attractive, I might go with it. But about 1 minute later the cousin walks in with a fucking baby attached to her tit, and comes and introduces herself to me. This chick was fairly large and had some serious meth teeth. The area I lived around that time had some real problems with the shit, and the most country accent I had ever heard at that time. At this point I'm freaking the fuck out inside my head, because having never been in this situation, I'm just absolutely astonished. So these two girls who I've now definitely concluded are crazy are sitting there talking to me, baby still sucking on the cousin's boob, when this guy with a lazy eye walks in with one of those cardboard cup holder things you would get from McDonald's holding 4 daiquiris. I'm not even sure that this shit is actually happening when he walks in, because it seems like one of those situations you would only see in a movie. So the chick with the baby on her tit says that now that the drinks are here, it's time to party, which makes it even weirder that the plan for a party was us 4. Anyway, the chick puts the baby in a car seat type thing, and puts the fucking baby in the bathroom and shuts the door. Now I know shit is way out of hand, and I'm not even going to stick around for whatever would happen next. After the chick went and put her baby in the bathroom, the guy looks around on the entertainment center and finds some burnt CD and puts it into this really beat-up looking stereo system. The reason I saved stereo is because it was like, I'm having a hard time describing this, but it was pretty much a CD player that was somehow spliced together to 2 really old computer speakers. So the guy presses few buttons on the stereo player, and it starts playing this really shitty techno music. And as you can imagine, the quality of the speakers was horrendous. This really caught me off guard because, as you can tell, these were some really white trash / redneck looking people. So they start drinking daiquiris and offer me some, to which I decline. I sat through about 1 song when the chick that just locked her baby in the bathroom, the baby was awake, by the way, got her cousin to move away from me, and she sat next to me and started rubbing my leg, and was telling me how she was feeling so lonely because her and her baby daddy had just broken up and she needed a friend. This was as far as I was going to let this go, so I do that old thing where you get your phone to set off its own ringer, and I went outside to take a call. As soon as I get outside, I make a dash to my truck, open the door, turned the thing on and floored it in reverse, sending rocks from the gravel road everywhere. I hauled ass out of that trailer park. After a few minutes I guess they realized that I wasn't there, and the first girl I had talked to on MySpace kept calling my phone, but I never answered. As soon as I got home I removed her, blocked her, whatever the fuck you had to do on MySpace to keep somebody from seeing you. I know this may not have exactly been a date, but I classify it as such because I went in with the intent of fucking some chick. That was the only time I ever looked on the internet for a hookup, or even gave it a single thought. To this day, I don't know what happened to those people, but I hope that baby grows up and realizes that her mother is fucking insane. I was walking down the street, cradling my old beat-up flip phone, the kind that creaked when you flipped it open and felt like a relic even then. I was wrapping up a phone call when it happened. Wham! My shoulder slammed into someone, and the phone slipped out of my hand, clattering to the sidewalk. Sorry, I stammered, kneeling to retrieve it. My brain barely registered the person I'd collided with, a quick flash of red hair, a murmured apology from her, and I was already hustling back to work. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I flipped it open, expecting another work call. Hello. Hey, a soft voice said, tinged with amusement. I think we accidentally swapped phones. For a second, I didn't understand. But then it clicked, same model, same beat-up state. I'd grabbed her phone in the chaos. "Oh wow, I think you're right. My bad." "No worries," she said, laughing lightly. "Want to meet up after work to switch back?" We agreed on a coffee shop near downtown, and when I walked in later that day, I spotted her instantly. She was sitting near the window, a sharp, professional-looking ginger in a suit dress, sipping on what looked like an espresso. She glanced up, caught my eye, and smiled. I won't lie, she was cute. Really cute. The kind of cute that makes you sit up straighter and wish you'd bothered ironing your shirt that morning. We chatted for a while, both laughing at the absurdity of the phone mix-up. She worked at a bank, loved the same movies I did, and even joked about how she thought fate might have orchestrated the whole incident. Before I knew it, we'd made plans for dinner that weekend. Saturday evening rolled around, and I was optimistic. Maybe this was one of those meet-cute stories people gush about. I pulled up to her place, parked, and waited. When the door opened, I blinked. Twice. The ginger who walked out was barely recognizable. Gone was the polished bank attire, replaced by platform boots that must have added at least 4 inches to her height, fishnet stockings that shimmered in the porch light, and a corset-like top that left little to the imagination. Her hair, once sleek, was now spiked dramatically. "Wow," I said, scrambling to keep my surprise in check. "You look ready for a fun night." She laughed. "I know, right? Let's go." I shrugged off my hesitation, reminding myself not to judge a book by its cover. Style was personal, and if her personality was as great as it had been at the coffee shop, this could still be amazing. On the way, we fell into an easy rhythm. She laughed at my jokes, matched my banter, and even one-upped me a few times. My spirits lifted. She asked what the plan was for the night, and I decided to joke about it. "Well," I said, grinning, "I'm taking you to my absolute favorite high-end dining establishment. If you're lucky, I might even supersize it. McDonald's," she said, catching on immediately and playing along. "A Big Mac? Oh, be still my heart." We both laughed, and I felt the tension from earlier melt away. This girl might have wild fashion, but she had wit to match. When we pulled into the parking lot of a cozy, upscale pub, I killed the engine. Her smile faltered. "What about McDonald's?" At first, I thought she was kidding, but the look on her face told me she wasn't. I chuckled nervously. "I was joking about that. Thought you caught on." "Oh," she said, her tone flat. "Okay." We headed inside and found a table. The vibe was warm and inviting, a place where the dim lighting and wooden beams made it feel timeless. I ordered a scotch to steady my nerves. She, however, ordered the largest boot of Bud Light I'd ever seen. For a moment, I was impressed by her confidence, until she leaned in close and whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I can't believe they let his kind into a place like this. We'd better check our food for spit." I froze. Our waiter was black, and he'd just walked away from our table. The man had ears, and judging by the stiffening of his shoulders, he'd heard every word. My stomach dropped. Surely I misheard her. Nobody says things like that in public, right? But no. She kept going, leaning over her massive glass boot and whispering a steady stream of vile commentary about racial superiority. I could feel the panic bubbling up inside me. The cozy pub, the polished wooden beams, the faint hum of laughter from nearby tables, it all felt surreal. How had this funny, engaging woman from the coffee shop turned into this? Dinner arrived, and she made a show of inspecting her plate for spit. My appetite vanished, replaced by a nauseating cocktail of secondhand embarrassment and anger. I caught the waiter's eye and gave him a look I hoped conveyed my apologies. He nodded faintly, his professionalism unwavering. By the time she'd polished off 3 more boots of beer, I was counting down the minutes until I could escape. She excused herself to the bathroom, giving me the opportunity to settle the check. I waved over the waiter and apologized profusely. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice calm and measured. "There are all kinds of people in this world." He gave me a small, understanding smile that only made me feel worse. I tipped him generously, hoping it would at least soften the blow of the night. When she returned, I braced myself for round 2. Instead, she lit a cigarette in my car without asking, filling the small space with smoke. "We should totally go shooting at my dad's farm," she said, exhaling casually. "What's your favorite gun?" I muttered something about not being much of a shooter and pointed out that it was getting late. Thankfully, she didn't argue. When I dropped her off, she turned to me with a smile. "This was great, except for that slur waiter. We should totally get that Big Mac next time. See you soon." I didn't even respond. I just nodded, forced a weak smile, and drove off. As soon as I turned the corner, I let out a shaky breath. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. What the hell had just happened? When I got home, I replayed the entire night in my head, disbelief washing over me in waves. The initial charm, the jokes, the sharp descent into something dark and ugly. It was like dating two entirely different people. I blocked her number before I even made it to my front door. Swapped phones with a cute ginger, went on a date, discovered she was wildly racist and generally unhinged. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. That's a pretty bad one. Mine isn't quite that bad, but it's pretty funny. So I had met this girl online. She was a friend of a friend. We got to talking for a bit and eventually decided to hang out. She lived about 30 minutes away in the middle of absolute nowhere, so I had to drive up to meet her. Since I'm not familiar with the area, I ask her where she would like to eat. She says, "Oh well, my favorite restaurant is not too far from here. We can go there. It's really fancy and expensive though." I told her that I didn't really mind, that I was willing to go wherever, and asked her what the restaurant was called. She says, "Oh, it's Red Lobster." Now I'm not one to care about how much money people have, but I was quite shocked that though Red Lobster was a high-class establishment. However, I let it ride because maybe to her Red Lobster is the epitome of fine dining. Turns out, Red Lobster is another 30 minutes away. On the way there we pass a handful of other restaurants. Olive Garden being one of them. This is one of those details that gets dropped in stories very nonchalantly, like I wonder if this will be important later. Anyway, so we get to Red Lobster and the hostess is walking us to our table. She seats us, hands us our menus, and begins talking about the specials. Before she is even able to finish, my date blurts out, "I already know what want." It was so awkward. She didn't say it in a rude way. She more said it in a more excited way. Like it was awesome that she already knew what she wanted, and everyone needed to know. Anyway, the hostess is stunned, and just kind of walks away. Eventually the waiter comes to our table, and she orders. She gets shrimp Alfredo with no shrimp. At this point I'm stunned. She made us drive 30 minutes, which is a long time to spend in a car on a first date, so she could get fettuccine Alfredo. Clearly this was the best restaurant choice, and not the Olive Garden. I still let all of this slide, because at this point she just seemed extremely eccentric, and I thought that maybe if I got to know her better then her behavior would be less odd. After dinner we are closer to my place than hers, and she wants to go back to my place to watch a movie. I oblige, obviously. We get back there, and I ask her what movie she wants to watch. She picks Happy Feet. Motherfucking Happy Feet. I guess at this point it's my own fault for even asking. So we start watching Happy Feet. She wastes no time in jumping my bones, so I don't make too much of a fuss. Now the clothes are coming off to the soundtrack of Happy Feet. Really awkward. She starts talking about how great she is at giving head as a little warm-up dirty talk. This was surprisingly not as awkward as it could have been, Happy Feet aside, and it was effective. Then she insists, no. Demands that she remove my pants using her mouth. Now I can see how some people would be into this, but not me. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was convinced that she was going to do it. And God bless her, she did. Button, zipper, and all. It was still just a really odd thing to do. Especially on a first date. Then she gets to the cusp of giving me oral sex, stops, looks up at me and says, "I don't mess around with guys that are not my boyfriend. So ask me to be your girlfriend." So I did. We dated for about 3 weeks after that, and she only got more crazy and weird. She actually got married a little while back, but before doing that she contacted me on Facebook to see if I wanted to have one more try with her. I informed her that I would not be interested, to say the least. A montage of French nuclear tests in the Pacific Ocean, observed by many marine iguanas. Then, in present days, a Japanese fishing ship is being attacked by an unseen monster. Only one survived. Traumatized, he is later questioned in a hospital by a mysterious Frenchman and repeatedly says only one word, Gajira. NRC scientist Nick Tatopoulos is called in to investigate the matter, and he quickly arrives at the conclusion that a giant, irradiated lizard known as Godzilla has been created by the explosions. Then Godzilla makes its way north, landing at Manhattan to begin wreaking havoc in the big city. Even with the combined forces of the US military are going to destroy Godzilla at all costs. But will it ever be enough to save the people of New York? I'll never forget the night I swiped right on disaster. It started innocently enough, an exchange of messages on Tinder, his profile picture showcasing a disarming smile and a laid-back confidence. His name was Daniel, and for days we texted about everything under the sun. Favorite movies, the books we were totally going to finish someday, and the weird quirks of our new city. He seemed normal, charming even, and after a few phone calls, we decided to meet in person. Little did I know I was about to meet the man who would forever be saved in my contacts as Donotancer Penispic. The restaurant was a cozy bar downtown, dimly lit with warm amber tones and a low hum of conversation. When I walked in, Daniel waved me over to the table he'd chosen. He was undeniably cute, tousled brown hair, a strong jawline, and a confident grin that hinted at mischief. But as we settled in, that charm quickly began to fray. Something about him felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. He was smiling, sure, but there was a bitterness in his eyes, as if the world owed him an apology. He launched into a tirade about the city. "I mean, this place is such a joke compared to California," he scoffed, swirling the drink he'd already half finished before I even arrived. "People here are just so uptight, you know? Like, especially about sex. Back home, people know how to live." I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "I guess every city has its quirks," I offered, trying to steer the conversation somewhere lighter. But Daniel was like a storm gathering strength. He leaned in, his tone growing conspiratorial, and started talking about sex, specifically his frustration with how prudish people were here. It wasn't playful or flirty. It was unsettling, like he was trying to test how far he could push. The waitress came by, a cheerful young woman who clearly didn't deserve what was about to happen. Daniel ordered a plate of fries, but when they arrived, he scrutinized them like they'd personally offended him. "Yeah, these aren't crispy enough," he declared, sending them back without a second glance. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he turned to the waitress and said, "Hey, my company's throwing a party this weekend. You should come by." Her polite smile faltered for a split second before she nodded and walked away. I sat there, stunned. Did he really just hit on the waitress in the middle of our date? Trying to salvage the evening, I pulled out my phone to show him a picture of my dog, a golden retriever with an uncanny ability to cheer me up no matter how bad a day I was having. "This is Max," I said, smiling. "He's basically my best friend." Daniel glanced at the photo, then smirked. "Oh yeah," he said, pulling out his phone. "Check this out." And then, as casually as someone showing off their new car or a vacation photo, he turned his screen toward me. Staring back at me was a picture of his penis. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. I blinked, hoping I'd misinterpreted what I was seeing. But no, there it was in all its unwelcome glory. My brain scrambled to process the sheer audacity, the blatant disregard for any semblance of decency. I wanted to laugh, cry, scream, all at once. I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell?" He chuckled, as if he'd just shared an inside joke. "What? You're cute. I thought you'd appreciate it." Appreciate it? I could barely breathe. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, the warm amber tones now suffocating. I needed to get out of there. The rest of the date was a blur of awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at small talk. When the check finally came, I didn't even pretend to linger. We walked out together to the valet stand, the air between us thick with discomfort. My car came first, a merciful stroke of luck. I mumbled a quick goodbye and practically dove into the driver's seat, my heart racing as I sped away. It wasn't until later that I realized my sweater was missing. In my haste to escape, I must have dropped it somewhere between the restaurant and the valet. I debated texting Daniel about it, but decided against it. I didn't want to give him any excuse to prolong our interaction. Of course, Daniel didn't leave it at that. A text lit up my phone that night. "Hey, you left your sweater. If you want it back, you'll have to hang out with me again, winky face." I stared at the message, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. The audacity, the sheer entitlement. It was like he thought he held my sweater hostage, as if a piece of clothing was worth enduring another second of his company. I typed out a response, then deleted it. No sweater was worth this. I blocked his number and let out a long sigh, mourning the loss of my favorite sweater, but grateful to be free of him. That night, I saved his contact under a name that would serve as both a warning and a reminder. Donotancer Penispic. It felt like a fitting epitaph for the brief, nightmarish chapter he'd written into my life. I'd met her through community theater, where her sharp wit and undeniable presence had caught my attention. When she said yes to going out, I thought I'd struck gold. She was everything I could have hoped for, brilliant, beautiful, and way out of my league. so of course I was nervous. We planned to see Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, a cheerful animated movie that seemed perfect for a casual evening. As we settled into our seats and started talking, it quickly became clear that we were not on the same wavelength. It started innocently enough, small talk about movies and hobbies, but gradually drifted into deeper waters. She loved indie films. I was more of a sci-fi fan. She mentioned her views on faith and politics, and I countered with mine. Neither of us backed down. What started as a polite discussion turned into a subtle but undeniable clash of opinions. Every exchange felt like a game of conversational tug-of-war, and I could feel the tension building with each passing minute. My jokes landed flat, her smiles didn't reach her eyes, and the air between us grew heavier. I was young, awkward, and out of my depth. What had started as a promising evening was quickly circling the drain. Desperate to release some of the pressure, I did something stupid. While we waited for the previews to start, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to my best friend. This date is a disaster. We're already arguing about politics, and I can tell this isn't going anywhere. I hit send and tucked my phone away, thinking nothing of it. Then I heard her phone chime. My heart sank as she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her eyes scanned the screen, and her brow furrowed in confusion. Slowly, she turned to me, holding her phone like evidence in a trial. "Did you mean to send this to me?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with disbelief. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what had just happened. "No," I stammered. "Oh my God, no. That was meant for my friend. I must have clicked the wrong contact." I forced a nervous laugh, hoping to downplay the situation. "You're both the only M names in my phone. It was an honest mistake." She didn't look convinced. Her expression was an unsettling mix of irritation and hurt, and the silence between us stretched painfully. Finally, she slipped her phone back into her purse and sighed. "Well," she said, her tone dry, "this is awkward." I scrambled to recover. "Look, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You're amazing, brilliant and beautiful, honestly. I was just nervous and, yeah, I'm an idiot." She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, leaving me to stew in my embarrassment. The lights dimmed, and the movie began, but I couldn't focus on a single frame. My mind was too busy replaying the incident on a loop, each repetition more painful than the last. She seemed calm, too calm, but I could tell she wasn't enjoying herself. Every now and then, I caught her glancing at me out of the corner of her eye, and each time, I felt like shrinking into my seat. When the credits rolled, we exchanged polite goodbyes in the parking lot. She thanked me for the evening with a tight smile and walked to her car. I watched her leave, certain I'd never see her again. Relief and regret churned in my chest as I drove home, trying to convince myself that the worst was behind me. When I got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and grabbed my phone. I needed to vent, to purge the evening's awkwardness with some cathartic oversharing. This time, I triple-checked the contact name before typing. That was the most uncomfortable date of my life. We argued about everything, and I doubt I'll ever hear from her again. Satisfied, I hit send. My phone chimed almost instantly. I frowned, confused by the quick reply, and glanced at the screen. The message wasn't from my friend. "You sent it to me again." I stared at the screen in disbelief, my stomach dropping into a pit of mortification, so deep I didn't think I'd ever climb out. Somehow, despite my best efforts, I had managed to text her again. Twice in one night, I had told the same woman how terrible the date was, once while sitting next to her, and once after swearing I wouldn't make the same mistake. I didn't even try to explain. What could I possibly say to fix this? Instead, I set my phone face down on the table, buried my face in my hands, and let out a long, defeated groan. We never spoke again after that. I like to think she tells this story to her friends, laughing about the idiot who accidentally texted her twice about how bad their date was. And honestly, she deserves to. If nothing else, it's a hell of a story. I have many, but I'll keep it to this one. It's because I think it takes the cake. I was a freshman in college, 18. I was going to a community college to gain the needed credits, so I can get my prereqs out of the way for less dollar than going to the local university. I met a girl who was a friend with a few of my friends. She was a very good-looking redhead with a large bust and small waist. Her name is Amber. I went out with them in groups a few times for lunch. After about a week of this, we start hanging out, dating, and studying after classes. It's going well. That weekend, my friend Ted was throwing a birthday party, complete with the shed out back converted into a bar. I show up with her, and she proceeds to drink a little. I do too, and we're having fun. Ted and company are a bunch of geeks. At one point, they were all hanging about talking about putting a gaming rig together. Amber decided to refill our drinks, and would be back to hang out some more. It was about 10 minutes before I realized that Amber wasn't back with my refill, and I wanted my Jameson. I go out to the shed to look for her. I get there, and I find her and one of Ted's friends with a bottle, plastic, of whiskey, and she is shotgunning half the bottle. Impressive, but she is about 5 feet 2 inches and 100 pounds. I laugh, get my refill, and she comes and hangs out for a bit. I'm a bit wary of this, and she starts to get weird. I excuse it as the alcohol is hitting her hard. To which I was right. She went from a slight buzz, straight to full-blown screaming and crying. She ran down the stairs to the basement and started screaming. I'm standing at the top of the stairs looking at her, and the entire house came running. They all thought I was murdering her or something. Sensing that Ted isn't happy about this situation, I apologize and ask his help in getting her into my car. He helps me get her into my freshly detailed BMW project car I was working on. I start to drive away, and she is still screaming and crying. I'm trying to shift gears while she cries on my arm. At one point I had the sunroof open, and a cop pulls up next to me. Me being slightly drunk thinks nothing of it. He hears Amber screaming and crying and rolls down his window. He asks if she is all right. I respond in the most confused look on my face, and say, I think so, but I think she's not taking the news her friend died very well. Cop rolls up his window and drives off. Ted's house is a 30-minute drive from his hose to Amber's. I stop at a light by Amber's house. I start to smell booze. I start thinking, where is the booze smell coming from? I look all around. All of a sudden, where Amber is grabbing my arm, I hear her gag, and my arm is wet and it just smells terrible. I realize that she threw up all over me in the car. I blow through the light and get to the side of the road. I pull her out in front of a fire station. I'm holding her whole body over some landscape rocks and letting her puke it all out. I was there for about 10 minutes with the entire department laughing at us. I finally managed to get her to her house. She's conscious again and in good spirits. I tell her what happens, and she offers to pay for the cleaning. She tries to get out on her own, but ends up being so drunk she fell over and racked her head on glass of the car door. I got her inside, and her mom wasn't mad at me but mad at her. I go home smelling like booze and vomit, and I have to spend the next 2 hours cleaning everything up. My car forever smelled like booze and vomit when the heater would be on. She managed to get it into the vent fans. Saddest part is I ended up dating her a couple more weeks. The final straw was when she punched her mom in the back for eating some cheesecake. Then the next day, insults my lab partner because he is fat. She was attractive, funny, and we clicked over shared interests during the week of texting leading up to the date. You know that cautious optimism you feel when you think you might have hit the jackpot? Yeah, that was me. We met at a bar she loved, a spot she was apparently a regular at, which I took as a good sign. It felt low-key but trendy, a place where the dim lighting made everyone look about 20% better, and the background music was just loud enough to drown out awkward silences. Things started off strong. We laughed, shared stories, and traded the usual first date questions. It was smooth, effortless. Or so I thought. That's when the conversation started veering toward the what do you really want to do with your life territory, and I, being the curious type, asked the seemingly innocuous question. So, you work in an office, but is that what you really want to do? Did you go to school for it? Her eyes lit up like I'd handed her a winning lottery ticket. Actually, she said, a mischievous grin spreading across her face as she reached into her bag. I had no idea what was coming, but I leaned forward, curious. Then she pulled out a red clown nose and stuck it on. I'm not exaggerating. A red clown nose. She sat there, wearing it like it was the most natural thing in the world, her grin widening as if she'd just revealed a deep secret. Wait, what? I managed to choke out, my brain short-circuiting. I'm going to clown school, she said proudly, her voice muffled slightly by the ridiculous piece of foam on her face. I'm training to be a clown. Now, let me be clear, I have nothing against clowns. They're a staple of birthday parties and bad dreams everywhere. But this was our first date. A first date is where you're supposed to highlight your best traits, right? Put your most impressive foot forward. Not lead with, I'm dedicating my life to juggling and balloon animals. But I didn't want to blow it. She was gorgeous, and I figured, hey, maybe this could just be a quirky thing she does on the side. So I plastered on my best supportive smile and rolled with it. "Oh wow," I said, trying not to sound as thrown off as I was. "That's so cool. I didn't even know clown school was a thing." "It's actually really competitive," she said, taking my comment as an invitation to dive into the finer points of the clowning world. I tried to keep the mood light. "So what is it? Like clown university, clown college, or clown technical school?" "Big mistake." Her expression changed in an instant. The playful glint in her eye vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp. "It's clown school," she said, her tone clipped. "And it's not easy. It's a serious art form." I blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. "Oh yeah, of course. I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking." But the damage was done. For someone training to bring joy and laughter to others, she had an alarmingly bad sense of humor. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned back, arms crossed, still wearing the damn clown nose. At this point, I was stuck. Half of me wanted to laugh, the other half wanted to apologize profusely, and the third panic-ridden half, yes, I had three halves at this point, was screaming at me to escape. But I stayed, trying to salvage what was left of the date. "So," I said carefully, "what's your clown school experience been like? Do you learn, like, juggling and stuff?" She softened, but only a little. "It's a lot more than that," she said. "There's slapstick, improvisation, character work. It's about bringing joy to people." "That sounds amazing," I said, and for a moment I meant it. I mean, who was I to judge? It wasn't the most conventional dream, but it was hers. And maybe there was something admirable about someone willing to dedicate themselves to something so unique. But then she started talking about clown hierarchies, about how some clowns didn't respect her particular approach to the craft, and how the clowning world could be cutthroat. She went on about mime snobs, and how she wasn't sure she'd ever earn the respect of her peers. The more she talked, the more it felt like I was listening to a documentary about some secret clown mafia. I smiled and nodded through it, occasionally chiming in with "wow," and "that's wild." But inside, I was begging for the date to end. We finished our drinks, and I mustered all my strength to politely suggest we call it a night. She agreed, but not before slipping the clown nose back into her bag like it was a loaded gun. We parted with an awkward hug, and I walked away wondering how I'd gone from excitement to existential confusion in under 2 hours. Here's the kicker. The next day, she texted me to say she didn't think we were a good match. She told me I seemed judgmental about her passion, and she needed someone who could support her fully. I didn't even argue. I just texted back, "Yeah, you're probably right." Several years ago, there was a new girl at work that I decided to actually make a move on for once. She was 20, kind of scuffling through community college, and in AA. Being the dumbass that I am, I think I can be the stake that supports her as she grows back into a wonderful person, and then she's so grateful that I stood with her during the bad times that I'll get to share in the good times to come. I mean, she's 20. How bad could her drinking problem have really gotten? So, I invite her out for dinner at a fairly nice restaurant here in town on a Saturday between newscasts we're both working. We both worked in newscast production. I dress up and go to the restaurant. She says she'll meet me there, and I wait up front for her to arrive. For 20 minutes, and she doesn't show. She went back home to chill out or whatever, I don't know. I call her wondering where she is, and she says she'll rush right over. 10 minutes or so later, she just shows up, in the same sweats she rolled out of bed in, rolled into work in, and rolled back into bed in. We have dinner, and during that 45 minutes, she ducks off to the bathroom twice, takes 3 calls on her cell phone, and constantly checks on her recently inked tattoo. Winnie the Pooh with his honey pot, in close proximity to hers. Later, back at work for the late show, she actually does thank me for taking her out. It was her birthday. She needed to take her mind off of what was going on in her life, etc. After leaving work for the night, she calls my cell, but I miss the call and figure it's too late to call back. A few days later, I'm still stupidly thinking this can work out, so I call her to say hi and possibly set something else up. She seems rather surprised I called, doesn't really say much, and excuses herself to go to an AA meeting. The next day, she goes into work in the morning and starts telling her friends there, her coworkers on the morning show, and my supervisor what an awful, horrible person I am. I don't know what she said, but it was apparently bad enough to turn friends and coworkers against me. Our supervisor advises her to let him know if this becomes a bigger problem, but never says anything to me about it. Soon after, she decides to give in to a building attraction to a horndog coworker and screws him in the bathroom, at work. This is on top of the overt sexual advances she was putting off towards another coworker, on top of the guy she was apparently already dating at the time. Several weeks later, she abruptly quits, now pregnant. I think it was her bathroom lover that knocked her up, I don't know, but I do know it wasn't me. Showing me her new tattoo was as close as I was getting, and she was showing that thing off to everybody. But a few months later, she comes back, still pregnant of course, and heaping scorn all over her sperm donor, while the other women at work rally around her. They don't care that she broke my heart. They're too busy being there for her, because she's just such an awesome person. Yeah, whatever. So now, I won't date women that are significantly younger than I am. I won't date coworkers. I won't go near anyone in AA, and actually, I don't even date that much at all. I didn't date much before, but managed to have such a bad experience that I have felt little need to climb back on the horse again. 6 months ago, I started talking to a girl from an online dating site. She was sweet, kind, and pretty. After a few weeks of chatting, we decided to meet and go see a movie, her suggestion. I would have rather gone for a beer at a pub, so being the gentleman that I am, I agreed. Turns out she only lives a few blocks away from me. I pull up in my car and wait for her. Normally I would have gone to the front door. However, she asked that I text her when I was out front, and she'd meet me at the car. I sit there waiting for 10 minutes, and she finally comes out. So does her cousin and her cousin's boyfriend. She tells me that they're coming along. Goody great. Her cousin is pushing 300 pounds, loud and I'll be frank, ugly as sin. And her cousin's boyfriend is a trashier scumbag Steve. He works in the oil field, and both he and her cousin like to smoke a lot of doobies. I know this because all the way to the theater, that's all those two would talk about. The girl I was meeting was pretty quiet the whole way through. Anyways, we get to the movie. It was Resident Evil 3D, and during the previews all three of them were getting giant erections over the Saw 3D trailers. Movie starts, and 20 minutes and her cousin has a melodramatic panic attack over the 3D, giving her a massive headache. Her giant cousin proceeds to leave and enter the theater about 50 times. She's big, she smells bad, is loud, and had no respect for the people trying to watch the movie at all. Movie ends, and we all go outside. Her cousin then proceeds to dry hump her boyfriend on the bench outside while they share a cigarette. Fast forward 30 minutes, and I drop them off at home. I say goodnight and speed away. This is where the story should end. But halfways home I get a call from the girl asking that I come over and chill out with them. I honestly wanted to say no, but I figured I wasn't doing anything, and this might turn out to be something funny to tell one day. I go back and enter her house. I now know why she had me wait outside when I picked them up. She lives at home with her parents, which is fine. That's not an issue for me. Her cousin and boyfriend live downstairs in the basement. The main floor of the house looks like an episode of Hoarders. It was filled with trash. Everywhere. I keep my shoes on and ask where the washroom is. Having a big drink at the movie had me wanting to pee pretty bad. I find the washroom, flick on the light, and there is piss and shit all over the toilet. On the seat, on the tank, around it. I pee and flush with my foot. I touch nothing. I even managed to turn the doorknob with my elbows. Anyways, after that I sat for an hour watching South Park and playing with two very cute cats. I ignored everyone for the most part. I caught bits of conversation between her cousin and her boyfriend. Lots of dirty talk, lots of, oh, you're gonna be my hubby, and I'm gonna fuck you so hard sort of shit. It made me sick. So after the hour was up, I tell the girl that I have to go. I have to be up early to make an appointment at the bank. Lie. She walks me upstairs, and as I'm saying goodbye at the front door, about 10 cats that I hadn't seen before literally emerged from the garbage in the living room. I left, and hadn't talked to her for about 6 months. Last week she messages me on MSN. She asks me how I've been. I tell her I've been okay. She tells me she has good news. I ask what. She tells me she's getting married. Oh, that's good. To who? I ask. She says John. I say, who's John? She says the guy we went to the movies with. At the time, I thought it was quirky, maybe even endearing. In hindsight, it was a massive neon red flag waving furiously in the wind. He picked me up at my house that evening. Grinning like this was the beginning of something grand. I was nervous but excited. First dates are supposed to feel special, and I was ready to see what he had planned. Little did I know his plan was nothing. We drove a single block to his friend Tony's house. I figured he just needed to grab something real quick. But instead, he marched straight into the backyard, cupped his hands around his mouth, and started yelling, "Tony! Tony!" The night air carried his voice far and wide, but there was no answer. After a minute, he scowled, muttered something under his breath, and stormed back to the car. Without a word of explanation, he got behind the wheel and sped off. "So, where are we going?" I asked hesitantly, glancing out the window at unfamiliar streets. He didn't answer. He just drove, zigzagging through back roads like he was avoiding something, or maybe just lost. We finally pulled up to the bowling alley, and he announced, "I wanted to surprise you." Surprise? I thought, skeptical. More like he had no clue where he was going. But hey, bowling sounded fun, so I let it go. The first game started off well enough. I won, which didn't seem to bother him much at first. "I let you win," he said, laughing. "I'm nice like that." But by the second game, he wasn't laughing anymore. I won again, and the smile on his face turned into a tight-lipped grimace. By the third game, it wasn't just a grimace, it was full-blown frustration. He was sweating, cursing under his breath, and glaring at the pins like they owed him money. "Want bumpers?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't even look at me. He just plopped down on the bench across from me, arms crossed like a sulking child. I won game 3. "That was fun," I said, hoping to diffuse the tension. "I used to be on a bowling league, so I guess I've got an unfair advantage." His scowl deepened. We left shortly after. Next stop, Chinese food. Things seemed to calm down over dinner. We ate, chatted, and for a moment, I thought the night might actually turn itself around. But then he went up to the counter to get a refill on his drink, and the cashier told him there was a 15-cent charge. That's when it all fell apart. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and stormed back to the table. "We're leaving," he barked, his face red with anger. I hadn't even finished my food, but I wasn't about to argue. We got in the car, and he drove us. Where else? Back to Tony's house. He stomped into the backyard and once again started yelling, "Tony! Tony!" Still no answer. I finally asked, "Why are we here?" "I wanted to finish the video game we were playing earlier," he said matter-of-factly, like that was the most normal thing in the world. With nothing left to do, he drove me the 1 block back to my house. I got out of the car, said goodnight, and went inside feeling utterly baffled. That was my first date with him. And somehow, against all odds, we ended up dating for a year and a half. Things didn't end until Valentine's Day, a date so catastrophic, it made the first one look like a fairy tale. I'd just gotten off an 8-hour shift waitressing, my feet aching and my patience worn thin. On the drive home, he texted me, "Hurry up and get ready." I just wanted to shower and rest for a minute, but he insisted I be ready earlier than the 9 p.m. time I'd suggested. He never mentioned reservations or plans, so I figured he just wanted to hang out. When he picked me up, he barely said a word. The silence was deafening as we drove, tension filling the car like a heavy fog. We finally pulled up to BJ's, a chain restaurant that was clearly packed. "It looks busy," I said, eyeing the line of people waiting outside. "We're not going to get a table." "I had a reservation," he snapped, "but you weren't ready on time." That was the match that lit the fire. We started arguing, him furious about the missed reservation, me furious that he'd never told me about it. The fight escalated quickly. I reminded him that I was the only one with a job and that I'd likely be paying for dinner, just like every other date we went on. He retorted that his parents didn't give him money because they didn't like me. Then he started punching the steering wheel. Hard. Over and over, his fists slamming into the wheel like it had personally insulted him. That's when I noped the hell out of the car. I ran to the nearest closed-down furniture store and called a co-worker, telling him I needed a ride. My ex followed me, still fuming, but I turned and yelled, "Stay away from me. You're never going to see me again." My co-worker, bless him, left his own date to come pick me up. The next day, I went to my ex's house to grab my stuff and give back the promise ring he'd given me. When I handed it to him, he said, "Hopefully the next girl will appreciate it more." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You might want to think twice about giving that to someone else." He texted me later that night, saying, "Give me some time, and maybe we can be friends." I never replied. I never saw him again. The coworker who picked me up that night? He had feelings for me. We started dating, and 5 years later, we're still together, happier than I ever thought possible, with a wedding on the horizon. Funny how life works out. Went on a blind date that my friend set me up on at a local bar with a live music night. It went well, and we decided we might do it again. The next weekend we met at a big art show/festival and decided it was a good night for some karaoke at a favorite local dive. She had had a couple drinks, and so had I, but everyone seemed pretty with it. On the drive over to the bar, she was looking around on the floor of the car while driving down a busy street and started to veer into the parked lane of cars. I managed to grab the wheel and correct before we slammed into the back of a parked car, which we most definitely would have hit if I hadn't. Strike one, bad driver, she's a distracted chick, etc. Sexist maybe, but in this case very true. About that time she told me she hadn't eaten that evening and was feeling a little tipsy. We got to the bar in one piece and started to enjoy the karaoke and some more beers. After another beer or two she began to let her hand wander around my crotch, etc., which I was fine with. Then she started to pinch me on the arm and what we called horsebitting, basically taking a handful of flesh and pinching and pulling at the same time on the inside of my thigh. Now I'm all for some rough play and aggressive folding, but this fucking hurt. I had to pin her hands to her lap and tell her to stop. By this point she was pretty drunk, it would seem, punctuated by nearly knocking the prompt monitor off its table while singing some damn song. I decided it was time to leave, and her being obviously rather on the trash side, I opted to drive because in Houston, it's basically a calculated risk of who's the least drunk. Dumb maybe, but she was still coherent and wanted me to come over. Sex makes dumb. So we start driving towards her neighborhood, which is on the opposite side of the city from mine, and about halfway there she tells me to pull into a side street. I do so, and she dives like a scuba enthusiast and starts giving me the business on the side of the road. I enjoy this for a while, but we're not really that far off the map, and cops in Houston like to patrol the burbs looking for degenerate idiots doing dodgy things in cars. Also, it appeared we were near her place, based on her previous information given. So I zip up, buckle up, and we start off towards her hood once again. She promptly passes the fuck out. This presents a difficulty as she didn't ever tell me an exact address, just a general area. I repeatedly try to wake her up to the point where she can be exacting in her location finding capacity. So there I am driving around buzzed with a passed out girl in the passenger seat in a neighborhood which caters to a certain demographic that is decidedly not my own and rhymes with Flixican. Not usually a problem, but at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night is not where I needed to be driving around aimlessly. At this point I make the decision that she's not going to be any damn help and that I should just drive home and put her up in my extra bed. She's mumbling the odd nonsense about, right over there, nobody knows yada yada. So after a white-knuckle drive with Houston's finest on my tail for a good portion, I make it home and carry her passed out ass up to my place. After checking to make sure she has a pulse and water and all that jazz, I dump her in the guest bed and start to get ready for bed. All of a sudden she's walking around, bumping into things and generally being a confused drunk. I ask her what she needs, and she pushes past me into the bathroom and slams the door. Fair enough. I leave her for a few minutes, but after 10 I realize she's probably passed out in there, which I'm just not going to have. She is indeed passed out face down on the floor blocking the door. After a little creative pushing and pulling I get inside and get her back on her bed. She starts ranting about how I'm being a stupid boy and something else about how I have no inbox. I've dealt with hammered chicks before, but this was a new one. She kept repeating something about my lack of an inbox and then lurched into my kitchen and began banging around. I walked in and asked what she was looking for. A bowl, she growled. I was glad to give up a mixing bowl if it was going to keep my sheets and floor clear of vomit, so I got her a large one and tried to figure out how to convince her to go back to bed or hit the bathroom to deal with her purge. She told me to go away and leave her alone, so I went to the opposite side of my apartment out of sight and waited while she banged around a bit more. Then I heard a wet splat and a groan. I called over, "Are you okay? Are you puking?" To which I got the unbelievably disturbing answer, "No, I'm pooping." My heart sank. This girl was dropping a deuce in my mixing bowl in my kitchen. I sort of clammed up and waited for it to end. After a minute I heard her stumble to the bathroom and dump the bowl into the toilet, run some water, drop the bowl and stumble back to her bed. I nervously did a sweep of the place to survey the damage. No turd on the floor in Tay kitchen, but the ghost of horrible acts very present. The bathroom was undisturbed, minus the very conspicuous blue mixing bowl sitting next to the john, with a not-so-blue film coating the inside. She had managed to rinse it, but not well. I gagged a little, decided to deal with it in the morning. I checked once more to make sure she was stationary, and went to sleep wishing it a bad dream. The next morning I awoke to her telling me she had a great time from what she remembered, and that she had to get to work. No mention of recollection of the night's previous events registered in her salutations. I decided to let the sleeping dog lie for the sake of her dignity, and told her basic geographical location. She chipperly bade me a fair day, and was out the door. I got up, found a trash bag and a rubber glove, walked into the bathroom, and trashed that bowl faster than you can say shit. I was in shock for days, and never called again. Unless someone died in a date. Hey, who knows? I do believe I have the worst date ever. I mean, ever. So, I'm newly single from a bad breakup of 5 years. She leaves me for another gal, and her friends, feminazis, decide to right a wrong and rob me of everything I own, save for my dog, bed, and some of my clothes. Anyways, so I'm a few months along, and try a dating website, Yahoo Personals. A gal messages me she's Hispanic, I'm white, I don't discriminate. And I'm like, alright, your picture looks okay. You type a little innocently immature, but text is sterile. I give her a shot, and we meet a bit south of me in a mall. It's public, they have restaurants. If things don't work out well, that's fine, we can go our separate ways. So I go there, and she messages me where she is in the mall. And I see a gal, but it doesn't look much of anything like the gal I've been talking to. Sorta, but like her uglier sister. Well, it's her. She photoshopped her pictures. A lot. Her smooth face in the pictures? Nah, moles all over. I'm not talking 1 to 2, I mean like dozens. All over her face. It's so strange and repulsive. Most guys would be like, I'm out biatch, but I don't want to hurt her feelings. I figure I'll chat, see what's up. I introduce myself to her, she says hi, and we walk through the mall. I notice a few minutes later someone is following us, shop to shop. Oh, that's my mom, she says. It bothers me a bit, and I ask, why is her mom here? By the way, we are both 25 plus. She explains her mom came along for the meet, with her brother-in-law, and his wife, pregnant, by the way, 8 months along. The gal keeps trying to kiss me in every store, but her mom is literally in the other all giving me the eye. It's freaky as hell, and not in a good way. So we, after an hour, go to the food court and get some food with the entire family. They seem nice, but it's just too damned creepy. They invite me back to their place for cards and family games. No orgies, but more of a grilling. They want me back at their place to grill me about their daughter. Not good for me. My stomach starts acting up as we're finishing up dinner, but it's not feeling like my stomach, like a weird diarrheal feeling. I excuse myself to the bathroom, where the feeling of needing to go intensifies quickly. I enter the bathroom, downing an Imodium as I enter. I'm sweating, and I do not feel good at all. I saddle up to the toilet, not much, and the feeling moves into my kidneys. It's all fast, I'm sweating, I don't feel good at all. It's not food poisoning, my stomach is fine, but I feel like I have a goddamned iron spike moving from my kidneys to my dick, and I'm not liking this at all, and it's getting bad. I see her outside the bathroom, and she says her family has gone to meet us nearby for me to follow them to their house, but we're parked at different areas of the mall, so we're to meet up at a nearby Denny's. While driving there, my dick track feels like it's on fire. The pain is too intense, I'm afraid I've broken something, and I don't know what, or how. We get to the Denny's parking lot, and I bust inside. Customers only, the sign says, but I don't give a fuck. I get into the bathroom, pull up to a urinal, and whip out my tang. At this point, I'm either going to shit my pants, piss an iron spike out, or pass out. I actually briefly pass out for a second. I catch myself falling against the wall in pain, but nothing coming out. I zip up and stumble outside. My ugly fucking date is standing next to my car, and the world goes gray, such a weird fucking feeling. I fall into the grass on my knees. The pain is so intense, I'm half a second from passing out. I try and mumble something to her about being in mortal pain, that I might need to go to the doctor, and there she is, 1/2 inch from my face, hairy moles all over her face. I want to puke on her, but I'm in so much pain, and she closes her eyes, and moves in a bit further for a kiss. A fucking kiss. While I'm passing out in pain, I push her away and stumble to my car and manage to peel out. I'm not sure how I made it to the highway. I should have gone to the hospital. I don't even know how I managed much of anything. Once I got back to my apartment about an hour later, the pain was gone, just a little pebble in the toilet. I'd met her on Plenty of Fish, and for 2 weeks, we'd been messaging nonstop. She seemed smart, funny, and even a little quirky in a charming way. So when she suggested we meet for dinner, I thought, why not? The evening began smoothly enough. We met at a casual steakhouse, the kind of place with dim lighting and country music playing softly in the background. She was even prettier in person, dark hair, confident smile, eyes that sparkled when she talked. We laughed, shared stories, and ordered our food. For a moment, everything felt easy, natural, like we were two people who could actually have something. Then he showed up. I didn't notice him at first, too caught up in the conversation. But when he stormed up to our table, his voice cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a blade. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. He was pointing at her, his face twisted with fury. Her entire demeanor shifted. She stiffened, her smile vanishing as she turned to face him. "What the hell do you want, Greg?" she snapped, her voice sharp and biting. "I told you to stay the fuck away from me," he yelled, leaning closer to the table. "You're insane. You ruin everything you touch." The entire restaurant fell silent, all eyes turning toward us. I sat frozen, unsure whether to step in or let them hash it out. The tension was suffocating, like standing at the edge of an active volcano. She fought back, matching his insults with venom of her own. It was like watching a grenade with a loose pin. Any second, it was going to blow. I managed to get between them, raising my hands in an attempt to de-escalate. Hey, let's calm down," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. The manager was already on his way over, his phone out, ready to call the cops. "We don't want to cause a scene here." For a moment, it seemed to work. Greg took a step back, his chest heaving, while she sat down, her expression a mask of icy calm. The manager hovered nearby, waiting to intervene if things got worse. And then it happened. She picked up her steak knife. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no warning. One moment she was sitting there, eerily quiet, and the next, she lunged across the table and drove the knife into Greg's chest. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud that seemed to echo in the silence of the restaurant. Greg staggered back, clutching at the knife, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and spreading quickly. My heart slammed in my chest as I stumbled to my feet, but before I could react, she turned to me. Her face was blank, disturbingly calm, but her eyes, God, her eyes were wild. They locked onto me with a terrifying intensity, and I knew in that instant that she wasn't done. She gripped the knife, now slick with blood, and started moving toward me. "Hey, stop," I said, my voice cracking with panic. I backed away, my hand instinctively going to my waistband where my Glock rested. "Don't do this." She didn't stop. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Her bloody hand raised the knife as she took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. I didn't think. I couldn't. My body acted on pure instinct. I drew the gun and fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. She jerked back, dropping the knife as she grabbed at her shoulder, blood blooming across her clavicle. She stumbled but didn't fall, her expression shifting from rage to shock as the weight of what had just happened seemed to hit her all at once. The restaurant erupted into chaos. People screamed, diving under tables or scrambling for the exits. Greg collapsed onto the floor, groaning weakly, while she stood there, swaying slightly, her hand still pressed against her wound. The police arrived within minutes. They found me standing there, the gun still in my hand, my body trembling uncontrollably. I quickly set it down and raised my hands, babbling about self-defense, about how she'd attacked him, and then came at me. Thankfully, the restaurant's cameras and the dozens of horrified witnesses corroborated my story. The officers reviewed the footage, and after a tense few hours of questioning, they determined that I'd acted in self-defense. Florida's stand-your-ground law covered me, and I was cleared to go. As for her, she was taken to the hospital and later transferred to a psychiatric facility. The police told me she had a history of violent outbursts, likely exacerbated by untreated bipolar disorder. Greg survived, but I never found out what happened to him after that night. The whole experience shook me to my core. One minute, I thought I was on a promising first date. The next, I was fighting for my life against someone I barely knew.